Thank you for joining us tonight for this critical conversation. However, before we begin, it's important to say his name and to take a moment of silence in memory of Mr. George Floyd. Thank you. Tonight is the first in a series of many conversations. We, the DPD, must be open to listen to our community. Neil Yarbrough is here with us tonight. Neil and other young leaders in our community offered space in their march on Monday, and part of our conversation surrounded a virtual town hall, a way to hear directly from our community the hurt, the anger, and the frustration that people are feeling here in our city. This is just one way to bring us together. However, we must acknowledge that some people will not have access to this. People like those experiencing homelessness and those impacted by the wealth gap that creates the digital divide. However, we want to create ways that their voices can be heard. We are using this town hall as a listening session to hear from you, your concerns, and your ideas on how to move the Denver Police Department forward. There is no formal agenda, just a listening session and question and answers. We also pledge that we will continue to do this work. One thing that we ask is that people be respectful in their questions. If you have questions outside this platform, please email them to us at dpdlistens@denvergov.org. We did receive several questions on our Facebook page, and we will start with those. If you do have questions for tonight, please enter them in the chat box. Now, as a reminder, this is only a 1-hour session, and we will do our best to try to get to every question that you have. However, we pledge to take in those questions and do everything possible to answer them as quickly as we can. I want to remind folks that this is, again, just the first of many sessions to have ongoing conversations to bring about meaningful change. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, so I'm gonna read off a few questions that we got from Facebook. Some people were wanting to ask some questions to the police department, so I have a few of them here. So I'll just get started with that. So the first question is from Jessica Solis Silva. She says, how do you intend, or what is your plan to rebuild community trust? I would like to see proactive steps to hire more people of color in your department.
So two parts and two very difficult questions. Trust is something that takes a lot to build up. It's relationship building, and things that we've recently seen 1,000 miles away, as well as things that we've seen here in our own community. Actions that members of our department have taken have really knocked down that trust. And you're right, we need to work to build that up, and we do that by having ongoing dialogue. We need dialogue to help us move forward, and our commitment is to do that. as well as to hire, to recruit, to look for those voices, the people from our community that can bring forward their experiences, that what they're feeling in their own neighborhoods to help us learn from that perspective and do better as a police department.
The second question is from Amanda Lotus. Sorry, I can't really see. I hope I'm not pronouncing it wrong. Lotus. She says, I'm concerned at the overly aggressive response by DPD to the protest, the use of rubber bullets, and the treatment of those trying to peacefully protest. I realize you will say that you only acted aggressive in the response to aggression, but I know that's not true. How do you plan to hold police responsible for their actions?
Thank you again. We're talking about accountability here. Accountability is a big part of what we need to do to build trust. And just like I have to hold our officers accountable for their actions, I must be held accountable as well. And we will review those. We will absolutely have an independent review as well, to include the Office of Independent Monitor. And we must take some very hard or a very hard look and critical review of what took place. We certainly do not want to negatively impact peaceful protesters. We must focus on the individuals that are causing harm to the people of Denver and the individuals that are causing harm to our community. And the focus should be on that. Those folks that are hijacking the message, that are hijacking the moment and hijacking the movement. Violence has no place in our community, and we have to do a better job of identifying those individuals that are causing the violence or destruction, hold them accountable without negatively impacting the folks that are here to really get their voices heard.
And again, I'm terrible with these names, but Denise Villalba, Valabia, says, well, actually, this is more of a statement, Chief. It says require observing officers to intervene when their fellow officer is using unnecessary force, especially when someone is already detained.
It's a great statement, and I'll just say yes, you're right. We saw this. We saw this on the video, and any one of those three other officers could have intervened. And we're not going to say that couldn't happen here. We need to make sure that doesn't happen here. That there is a duty to intervene, and we see what the horrific, tragic loss of life can happen when officers don't intervene in these unnecessary uses of force.
Okay. Here's another good one. Dia Smith says, how can we better help the good officers so we can find some kind of way to restore faith in the police here in Denver? How will you apply this whole situation and loss of innocent life to change your departments? Is there a way the police can show they are not above their badge in a way that honors all people as equals?
Well, we have to acknowledge the mistakes that law enforcement historically has made, as well as this department and individual actions of our officers. It's about building that trust. And when that trust is violated, it's very difficult to bring it back. We must hold ourselves accountable for our actions and pledge to do better. But we certainly need the community's help and input in this, and that's what we are asking for here. So the way that I can best guess, and we certainly need community involvement in this, or community voice in this, is by working together.
Here's a good one from Ken Church. Ken Church from Facebook says, is there any policy to remove police officers that are involved or associated with any white supremacist or racist group? If not, do you plan on implementing one?
So racism has no place in law enforcement. It certainly doesn't have any place in the Denver Police Department. And really, if we go backwards and we look at not just what happened, right? Not just what happened in Minneapolis or what happened in the last several days here in Denver, the why that things happen. And some of this is structural racism that impacts the criminal justice system, the public health system. It impacts housing. It impacts our economic system. And we have to look at this in a holistic approach, more towards those whys. But when we talk about officers that may have any kind of bias, racist biased views, we can't tolerate that. And together we need to make sure that we're working to ensure that those folks aren't hired within the police department. And if they are identified, that they're immediately removed, because that's antithetical to our values.
See, David Snyder from Facebook says, can you please speak more as to why the other two officers who committed the support of the riot gear photo message have not been disciplined?
So if you don't mind, I just want to touch on that social media post. It's inexcusable. It's the opposite of what we're trying to do. It's the opposite of what we and the other young leaders talked about. We're trying to come together, and what was said in that post really served to escalate tensions, and that cannot happen. It cannot happen in a moment of crisis when our only path forward is to come together. That serves as a divide. And so the officer that was responsible for that post was disciplined, and he was disciplined quickly. And that discipline included that that person is no longer a member of this police department. Subsequent investigations related to that and other actions, we will take a hard look at, as well as that independent view, or that monitorship from the Office of Independent Monitor, and we must hold ourselves accountable. We must learn from our actions. We've got to do better. We can't go down the same path.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Kelsey Lewis says, thank you for holding this meeting. Are internal affairs investigations carried out wholly within the Denver Police Department or through the Office of the Independent Monitor?
So it was Kelsey. Is that I forgot if
Kelsey.
So one, and maybe we can do this online where we can submit some links to the Office of Independent Monitor. That way we can share the full understanding of what that office does. But Internal Affairs does review or does the investigations, and those are fully monitored from the independent monitor from start to finish. And if somebody can on the chat line add those direct links, then we can get that information to Kelsey and others on how to file a complaint and what that process looks like.
Okay, we have one from Chelsea Hansen. She says, what data-backed policy does DPD use to counteract racism, prevent deaths in police encounters, and decrease unnecessary aggression and violence?
So I think some of these questions, unfortunately, are going to be we just don't know, or we need to look into. I can tell you that we recognize that we need to do a better job hiring. That's a big part of law enforcement's area to improve. Law enforcement needs to do a better job with training. We certainly need to do a better job with discipline and accountability. We try or we call ourselves a data-informed police department. We call ourselves a police department that wants to learn, but this is something that is a little bit bigger than strictly our department. When we're talking about individuals and human behavior, we need to do better of identifying that early and addressing it quickly, and we welcome any support that maybe some of the folks on the line can point us to a data-informed way to identify or address this challenge or this issue.
Okay. And then I'm gonna take a question away from this really quick. So during a lot of the protests, there's a lot of people from several different backgrounds, all ethnicities, that are just hurt and they're just angry, and a lot of people just don't feel heard. Like we just feel like the things that we're saying is just falling on deaf ears, and that a lot of the questions, and I'll keep one question at a time, but a lot of the people don't feel heard. So what can the Denver Police Department do to ensure the people that and make us know and feel that we are being heard, and that we are being felt, and that pain is also being felt?
So a couple of parts, and please help me so I address each concern in here. It's important that we that our department listens. Now, words are just words until they become actions. Monday, certainly marching with you and the other young leaders, talking to Dakota and Shira, really helped me get a better informed perspective. Reflecting on what's taking place has really helped that understanding. And as we think about it, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, right? There's a great risk to us marching together. And the fact that we have thousands of people, as you say, from all walks of life, that are willing to put their lives at risk to come together shows how important this is.
Right.
Certainly, this is a message, right? This is a message that we have to listen to. But this moment, we need to make sure that we realize that this is the start of a movement, right? That this is the tipping point, because we've had too many examples of this in the past. And it certainly would be easy to say, oh, well, that's that department, or that's in a different state. Well, no, it's time that we all come together, that we all look at this and try to figure out how we can do better. And, throughout this process, I can tell you that, there's a greater level of of awareness and a greater level of understanding, but this is just the start. We have a long way to go, but the fact that you, those other young leaders, the thousands of other folks from every walk of life, young, old, different races, different religions, different sexual orientations are all coming together. We all need to listen to this message and be present for it. So this this is not just our city, and this is not just our state, and this is not just our country. They're having similar protests across the globe. So it is I believe this is the tipping point, and we have to do better. And our commitment is we're going to be open to do better.
And I do want to make sure that we get through a lot of these questions on Facebook, since people took time out there to ask them. And I just want to ask one more question that I was hearing from some people, and it's a tough question. I know we may not have an answer for it right now, because this stuff is not only going on recently, but it's been going on for quite frankly centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's just what can we do to make sure that this type of injustice and racism, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Like, what can we do to feel confident that this is just not going to happen next year, next month? Like, what can we do today to try to prevent that from happening in the future?
So I apologize. I don't have the answer, but I certainly recognize that we're talking about 400 years,
Right.
And decades of trying to do better, decades of getting it wrong,
Yeah.
and having too many names like George Floyd, too many instances of injustice. Our pledge on the micro level here in the police department is to listen and do better, but there are some systemic aspects of this that impact the major systems that we live in, and as we become more aware in public safety and try to put a public health view on some of these, we got to back that up even more and look at these major systems and the inequities, the bias, the inherent bias in some of these, and as a community, as a society, how we can break those down, identify, maybe through data, maybe in different ways, working together to try to address those. But on the micro level, the commitment for the women and men that work in this police department, that we will look in the mirror, and we ask the community to hold up that reflection and hold us accountable to do our part to move forward, recognizing that there's a long way to go, and it's a lot of words for me to say I don't know, and I really I don't know, but I'm hoping that we can come together and figure it out.
So I think we're gonna take some questions from the chat. So I'll start with. So here's a question. Somebody wants to know from the chat about the tear gas that are being used against peaceful protesters. Is there? Can you speak on that?
So, it's certainly not our intent for tear gas, the pepper ball, or the less lethal munition to impact peaceful protesters. It's important that we make space to hear the voice of the people that, again, are risking their lives to be heard. It's unfortunate that there are a handful, a very small full of individual agitators that are hijacking, early on in this process, early on in these protests, hijacking the peaceful protests and committing violence in our city, hurting the people of Denver and damaging and destroying not only public spaces, but some of these poor private business owners that are just coming out of this global pandemic, these economic downturns, and trying to make a living, trying to hire people to get them employed in jobs, and the economic divide as a result of that as well. So they certainly all fit together. I can certainly apologize to the peaceful folks that have been negatively impacted by this. It's certainly not our intent, and I guess that's the best way I can answer at this moment.
Then here's another question from the chat. It's another good one. It says, what deters a police officer from committing crimes when they can get many complaints against them without any consequences?
Well, it's accountability, and we need to do a better job of accountability. And my commitment is to work with this community to do a better job of accountability.
We'll keep some more from the chat. It says, someone says the last 2 nights, officers kept their distance and protesters were more peaceful. What lessons can we take away from that?
If you don't want mine, I want to commend you and other young leaders. There's many like you that recognize that this message is too important to allow others to hijack, and are stepping up and not allowing the destruction or the harm to take place. You all are important in keeping the peace here. This is exactly what we need. We need these peaceful protests, these marches to continue to continue to hear the voices, and we want to fully support those. The last 2 nights have been very peaceful, and we really are thankful for that.
Here's a really good one from the chat. It says, if good cops exist, why aren't we hearing from more of them speaking out against police brutality?
That's a righteous question. I can tell you that looking into the hearts of the women and men that make up the Denver Police Department, that the vast majority of our officers that are out there putting themselves in harm's way in order to protect this community are just that, good cops. And I can tell you from talking to our officers as well, that they find these actions despicable. They see this as being horrific, and we recognize as a profession, we recognize as a department that we have to do better, and standing up, voicing our disgust with this type of injustice has to take place. We have to make sure that our great big-hearted officers are valued, that they're heard, and that they step into that space and not tolerate or not allow the type of behavior that destroys our relationships, destroys trust, and harms people. So that's what we need to continue to foster. That we need to continue to look for officers that represent our community, all segments of our community, that bring diverse backgrounds and perspectives of our community, and make sure that they're supported when they call out injustice, when they stand up and prevent harm to our community.
think this is a good follow-up question from the chat. It says, how does the chief feel about how his officers have responded during the George Floyd protest?
So this is a good question. I know, I see it. I see some great work that's being done. I see officers that are stepping up and protecting the good people of Denver. I see officers that are putting themselves in harm's way in order to keep people safe, as well as to protect this beautiful city that we love. And so I see that, and I'm encouraged. But I also see things that I'm not proud of. And that takes away from the great work that the vast majority of our officers are doing. The women and men of the Denver Police Department, as well as the mutual aid partners that are continuing to put themselves in harm's way. That work should be commended. We should be very thankful that they're willing to stand there and protect people. The bad behavior, we have to call out, and we have to hold them accountable for their actions. And that's what needs to happen. It's disappointing that some individual actions have eroded some of the amazing work that continues, the amazing dedication that continues in an effort to keep our community safe. But if we don't hold our people accountable for their actions, then that continues, and it's our commitment. And I think that the officers that are doing this good work expect that. They expect us to hold our team accountable, and the individuals that aren't getting it right, the individuals that have made missteps and created harm, that we have to do something about it. And the community deserves that as well. The community deserves to have a police department that holds itself accountable and holds its officers accountable.
Let's see. Try and get another good one. This is from Facebook. This one is a pretty lengthy question, so I'll just read it off. It says, do you support changing Colorado law to impose a duty to intervene when officers witness another officer using unreasonable force? What are you doing to support this change in law or policy in DPD? 2, what is the current DPD policy on using chokeholds? If it is allowed in any circumstance, do you intend to change it in light of police killing in instances where it has been used in unwarranted situations by DPD in the past?
So two-part question, and yes, we fully support the duty to intervene, a law requiring the duty to intervene. You just look at that video. You just look at the video of the death of George Floyd, the horrific death. It involved 4 officers, and if any one of them would have said enough, if any one of them would have said stop, then we wouldn't know George Floyd's name. So there absolutely has to be a duty to intervene, to try to prevent these types of horrific killings. Secondly, on the chokeholds, we have, through the community's help, we have strengthened policies, but strengthened policies to put strict prohibitions on carotid control holds or a chokehold. We also have prohibitions. We also prohibit the body weight and placement of knees on necks and on backs and heads and body weight, and then also a duty that once somebody is in custody, that they're either rolled over on their side or lifted, so we can reduce any kind of positional asphyxiation. These were some of the ideas that the community has brought forward, but I want to be careful here. I don't want to say that, hey, our policies are good. What we're going through, this movement is bigger than just our department. This is global when you talk about how it's impacting our state, our country, and nations across the globe. And we have to take yet another look at these and see what's working and what's not working. We have to see how we can work together to prevent these types of horrific tragedies, these killings that should not happen in our community.
Jamie Winkler from Facebook says, thank you for beginning the discussion. And she has 3 questions. I'll just pick off one, or we won't do them all at once. She says, does every officer wear a body cam at all times? Question. Or if not, what is the current protocol?
So on body cams, I want to give a brief answer, but then in the chat group, we'll put a link to our policy as well. That way, Jamie and others can get a little bit more detailed. Okay. Every officer and every frontline supervisor in the Denver Police Department is required to wear the body camera. Any officer, regardless of rank, working off duty, also has to wear a body camera. And body cameras have helped. It's something. It's a tool that has helped improve accountability. But again, we have to take several steps back, and we have to look and make sure that our policies, one, are aligned with our values. But now we have to incorporate all of this. What is the best path moving forward? And we need the community's help in doing that. But we will post in the chat group here the link to the body cam policy, and again, we're taking a step back. We want to open the door for conversation about the policies within the police department, recognizing that we need to do better.
Another one from Jamie. She says, is there a program that is strongly supported for officers to come forward who have firsthand witnessed misconduct by another officer?
So our entire policy manual is online, and there is a component of the policy that requires officers to report misconduct, and a pathway for them to do that, utilizing both the chain of command, internal affairs, or an outside source. Again, I think it's important that we recognize officers that would have the courage to step forward and say, enough, stop, to intervene and to point out misconduct. We need to celebrate those officers and acknowledge it, encourage it, and make sure that becomes the culture of every officer that wears this uniform or this badge. And we certainly will work with the community to find better ways to do that, to hold ourselves accountable. So Jamie, two tough questions or two great questions. Thank you.
See if we can find some more good ones in here. Okay, here's a good one from Aaron Go Brawl. He says there are many roles in the community that could be better filled by a social worker instead of law enforcement. I know that the Denver School Board is already looking to end its contract with DPD in regards to police roles in schools. Can you pledge to analyze what other city roles police are occupying that could be filled by nurses or counselors instead?
Aaron, you're right, and again, we need to step back and review everything that we do. We have some areas where, to Aaron's point, putting individuals that are not law enforcement into public health situations, people that are facing some mental health challenges. We're seeing some positive impacts of that with our co-responder program, and then also a program called Alternative Response, where instead of a police officer, a fire truck, and paramedic ambulance going to some low-level calls, that what if we eliminated the sometimes the uniform of a police officer, somebody that has some low-level, they're not violent, they're not creating harm to themselves or others, but just need some help. That what would it look like if we removed the police officer response, the 911 call that dictated the police officer response? And we're certainly working towards that direction. That's kind of that the concept of using the public health lens to look at public safety issues, and recognizing that that outcomes may be better by utilizing individuals that have different skills, to include nurses and mental health technicians and such. So we see some direct benefits of that, and again, it would be important to explore expanding those types of alternative responses to our community.
Let's see. Here's another good one from Steve Zorn, and it's pretty lengthy also. He says, why does the DPD call crimes complaints if the person committing the act is law enforcement? This happened to me in District 1 with officers Hernandez and Sergeant Wallace. Both members of DPD told me that I could not report crimes against law enforcement. When I called to complain, it was swept under the rug by IA. It was swept under the rug, but with a statement that said they made a mistake, but no disciplinary action were taken. It was clear. It was a clear case of obstruction.
Well, Steve, what I can tell you is that complaints that come in against the Denver Police Department, that there is a level of review by the district attorney's office. I can tell you that this district attorney has filed charges against a Denver police officer in the recent past. So certainly complaints of law violations certainly can be charged as such. And then there's also that second level of review from the Office of Independent Monitor. So every complaint that comes in gets that level level of review. So in the chat group, I think we've already posted the Office of Independent Monitors address or email address, I'm sorry, link in there. And it's something that comes to the word accountability, and we must hold ourselves accountable.
Here's some more good questions from the chat. Someone says from the chat, hiring process, what characteristics will you prioritize?
Say prioritizing hiring?
What characteristics do you guys prioritize when hiring officers?
So, really something that's difficult to measure is what's in somebody's heart, right? I mean, it kind of goes back to some of these other questions about having social workers or nurses and healthcare professionals in there. We want officers that care about their community, and the better job that we can do identifying and hiring officers that care about people, that care about their neighborhoods, gives us an opportunity to do better. And it's a way that we can get diverse backgrounds and diverse perspectives, not just from the outside, but from the inside, and to help change law enforcement and to change this police department. If we have folks like myself who grew up in North Denver, deeply connected to the community, you want those strong ties, and we need officers that care about people, that care about our neighborhoods, that care about our city, and frankly, all of us that want to improve, that want to continue to learn, that want to continue to do better, and that can say, hey, I might have thought I know what's going on, but that are open to learn new perspectives, and those are the types of characteristics that we're looking for in the women and men that make up the police department, both sworn and civilian.
We have some more questions from the chat. Someone says, if you could, what would policing look like if we could start over from scratch? What should it look like?
Wow. It's a great question, and I don't have the answer. I think it touches on some of the things that we've talked about a little bit, some of the systemic issues that we have in the criminal justice system, and some of these other systems that are intertwined with it. I think that this movement really challenges us to reflect on what's going on now, and to really take that step back and ask those types of questions. But I don't have the answer to that one, but it is a great question.
Cool. We'll get another one from the chat. It says, how does the police internally address the us versus them mentality that has a tendency to develop?
You're right, and this is a time when again we need to come together. It shouldn't be us versus them, right? Our officers, they come from the community. They're people just like the people that we serve. They're sons and daughters, they're parents, they have families. We can't lose sight of that perspective. It cannot be an issue of us versus them. This needs to be all of us versus the issue of injustice. And when we can get to that point, when we can work together as many steps back as we've recently taken, again, through our own actions here in law enforcement, we must break down any of those divides, because we as law enforcement, we as the Denver Police Department, we don't have the answers. We certainly cannot do this alone. The only path forward for us as a community is to work together. That's the only path forward. And police officers, police departments, hunkering down and not working with community, that's detrimental to the only way that we can do better, and that is us communicating, building dialogue, building relationships, trying to rebuild trust, listening to the community needs, and pledging to do better, to have a better department, to have a better city, to have a better community. The only path forward is us working together. We can't do this alone.
Here's another one from the chat. Rachel asks, why hasn't the person who attempted to run over a protester why hasn't the person who attempted to run over a protester not been arrested? Why have they not been arrested?
So I can tell you that this is an open, active investigation. We have to be sensitive on what we can share on open investigations here. We review this closely with the Denver District Attorney's Office. If we share too much information on open cases, it can jeopardize these types of outcomes. And if we contribute and have a misstep, then that further exacerbates an injustice, right? The person responsible isn't fully held accountable. And so this is an open case, and we're working hard to make sure that it has an appropriate resolution.
Here's another one from Rachel in the chat. She says, do you see value in longer training at the academy to become a police officer that addresses diversity, multiculturalism, social justice, and history of racism, etc.?
The answer is yes. This is too big of a movement for us not to pay attention, and we have to re-examine all of the things that we do, to include training. Training is a huge component of how we serve our community. We have to recruit the right people, we have to train them the right way, and then we have to hold our people accountable if we fall below our standards, if we fall below the policy expectations, if we fall below the values that we in our community espouse.
We have more from the chat. Seth from the chat asks, what are you doing to reduce the number of officers involved in shootings?
I think this goes to training as part of it. This is a big issue. We've been leaning forward on some aspects, but again, I don't want to say that we figured anything out, because we must re-examine. This is too big of a movement for us not to take a hard look at every single thing that we do. Currently, we utilize some innovative training that utilizes virtual technology, but it's important that we look at everything that we do and see if there are ways that we can do better. And we're saying right now, we're pledging right now that we are open to that and open to hear from our community that their perspective may aid in the training, that it may aid in the development of our responses. And we have to take a hard look because we want to do better. We have to do better. We cannot stay on this path.
Here's another good one from the chat. Says, did FOP or DPD donate to any political parties or candidates? If so, can you explain how that isn't corruption?
I can't speak for the union or the labor groups. I don't know if or who any of the labor groups may have contributed to political candidates or causes.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions here. Okay. So we're coming towards the end, so I'll try to pick some pretty good questions here. Really want to get a good couple more. Here's a good one from Shaya. Shaya asks, how do you uphold the pledge you took as a member of the Brother Keeper Alliance? Excuse me. How do you uphold the pledge you took as a member of the My Brother Keeper Alliance?
Well, My Brother's Keeper and other community groups are important allies in how not the police department, but how the community can help people. It's about building relationships. It's about working in partnership and collaboration with many groups. We certainly don't have it completely figured out, but there have been many positive steps that have been taken, many positive actions that have been taken, partnerships and collaborations to help people. We don't want to lose sight of that. However, kind of an answer that we've stated a little bit, we have to re-examine everything that we do. Those strong relationships with community-based organizations that help people is certainly part of the solution, and we have to continue to rebuild those relationships and trust.
Do we have time for one more? Here's a really good one. This one I definitely want to know, affects me too. This one says, the man in the car with his pregnant lady who was fired at, how do you defend those cops' actions?
So, this is something that hurts and must be reviewed, and we must hold our officers accountable for their actions, and we will.
I just want to say thank you for having this open dialogue. I think this is a great first step to us having some real change. I feel like this is the first time in this country where we're actually having that conversation. We're actually having that tough talk about injustice and racism. And I think a lot of people are going to be happy. And I think we're making a good first step to change and progress. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, again, thank you for creating the space on Monday, allowing me to meet with you, to talk with the other young leaders that are stepping up because they want to make sure that the message is heard, that the message is heard loud and clear. I know that some of the conversations that I had with some of the young leaders that I got to speak to really helped me attain a greater level of understanding. And these types of conversations need to continue. That said, you're right. This is just one step. There'll be an ongoing series of opportunities or conversations like this. We want to do better in the future. We're committed to doing better in the future. We have to. We cannot go down the same path. That said, again, there are people that aren't able to join us. The digital divide, people that don't even have homes in order to plug a computer in to join us. So we also have to hear from people that are impacted by the police as well, and our pledge continues. So that we'll use that email address. We'd ask if folks could help us, maybe even capturing like video interviews from people experiencing homelessness and their perspective that can be downloaded into that email address. But our ongoing commitment is to do this work, this hard work that I don't have the answers to, but hopefully, working together is how we can get answers to these historical challenges, these systemic challenges, these institutional challenges that are interwoven and based in bias, based in some economic divides as well, and work together to try to find some solutions. So that said, thank you for this. Thank you for what the other young leaders are doing, and we hope to do better in the future. Thank you, and stay safe.